Hey, Brandal,
Yeah,
tell me about oil tanks.
oil tanks. All right, oil tanks. Oil tanks are a normal part of home buying in the Northwest. Could be all over the country, not sure about that. But in Seattle, we were really heated from oil, let's say 1930s to 1960s. Could be earlier. Houses started with coal and then they went to oil, and then in the 1970s we went to electric, and then in the 1990s we really started pushing gas. That's a rough overlay of it. We'll run into houses that are newer out in the country that have oil. But generally in Seattle, what you are concerned about if you're buying or selling a house, or if you just own an old house, is that oil tank, if you're not on oil anymore, if you're now on a heat pump or a gas furnace, is that oil tank still in the front or backyard? And so you definitely want to, let's say you're buying or selling a house, you really want to, as part of your buying and selling a house, you want to come to a conclusion that there's no oil tank on the property. Oil tanks can leak, and that was the main issue. There used to be a state insurance called PLEA. That's no longer out there, so you can get, I think, insurance, but it's very expensive. Leaking oil tank can be big money, so we would definitely like to make sure that there is not one on the grounds. When I do home inspections, I'm looking for evidence of tanks, which is going to be oil lines down in the basement. Do we have a particular type of chimney configuration? Do we have a breather tube or an oil tank in the front or backyard? Those are all things that we look for. But I also know if I'm looking at a house that was built anywhere from 1900 to 1960, maybe 65, I'm automatically going to just be writing into my report, hey, check for an oil tank, because it might or might not be here. And there have been numerous inspections that I've done where the people selling the house are like, nope, no oil tank here. And then I'm literally in the front yard underneath the rhododendron going, what about this stem, this fill stem sticking up out of the front yard? And they didn't know, because when they bought the house in 1993, it was heated by gas. So they had no clue that there was oil, and nobody cared back in the early 90s. So now they got an oil tank they got to deal with, right? Oil tanks. Right now it's about $1,300 to decommission an oil tank in Seattle. If you have an oil tank and it's on your property and you find it later and it's leaking, that can be $10, $20, $60, $70, $100,000 to clean up. The highest one I ever heard of was $250,000. So that can be a serious chunk of change. So it's really something for you to look into if you're buying or selling a house, or if you're like us, if you just had a house, you bought a house and it's old and you didn't know, and then later on you became a home inspector and you're like, oh, I should check into whether or not we have an oil tank or not, which we did, and we decommissioned it. That's oil tanks.